In today's episode of Dynamically Speaking, we talk with Mark Berg and David Brossard on their experiences at FIDO Alliance's Authenticate and Nordic APIs Platform Summit. So let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Dynamically Speaking. I'm Emme Reichert, the marketing manager at Axiomatics, and with me as always is our CTO, David Brossard. Hey David, how are you doing?
Good morning, good afternoon, doing good. What about you?
I'm doing good. And we have another special guest today. We are re-welcoming our principal architect, who is now also a reoccurring guest, Mark Berg. Thanks for joining us, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm a little sleepy, but thanks for having me, Emme.
Well, that kind of ties in what we're talking about today, because you just came back from a time difference. For our listeners who may not know, because we've been posting about it on our socials, this week, Mark got to go to California to attend FIDO Alliance's Authenticate, and David got to attend Nordic APIs Platform Summit in Stockholm. So let's start with our guest today and talk a bit about Authenticate. So Mark, if you want to talk about kind of why you were there and what you were speaking about, we can start there.
Sure, that sounds good. I think maybe first, in case people don't know, explain what Authenticate is. It's a conference put on by the FIDO Alliance. That's not about your pet dog. It's about fast identity online, which is related to passkeys, the new latest craze in the authentication world that is meant to replace passwords and be a much more secure and easier experience for users to sign into applications. So, maybe wondering, well, why did an authorization company? Yeah, I'm still having troubles with the A's after this week of authentication and authorization. It's very hard to pronounce those words properly when you're doing them over and over again. So yes, repeat. So why is an authorization company going to a authentication conference? Well, there is some bleed over, there's some carryover, and there's a lot of people that work in both areas. So we wanted to try to get more exposure into that group of people who have been working hard on solving this authentication problem, making it more secure. There's a lot of architects there who may be getting bored with authentication because they've kind of got it mostly solved. And then maybe they're moving on to a new project. So we want to try to tease them with some authorization problems. So while I was there, I was part of two presentations. One was a Monday morning, the first show of the conference. We talked about ALFA, the abbreviated language for authorization. And we also talked about this authorization in general, since some people there might not know what it is or might not know it as well as we do. So that was the first morning conference. We're going up against, of course, some AI conferences, as always. But we did have a turnout, and we had some people that were engaged. It was a little bit like going to a vegan conference and explaining to them all the different ways to prepare, cook, and eat meat. Some people are just not interested, and some are secretly interested, but they're ashamed of what the other people will think if they see them at the meat conference. So, yeah, we weren't expecting a huge turnout, but we did. Yeah, people were there. They were engaged. We did get questions. So overall, I think we accomplished the goals of spreading the message.
I would agree with that. And now both of the courses that you did, the masterclass and the authorization What's Next panel, those are recorded and will eventually hopefully be out on FIDO's YouTube channel and on their website, like they've done in years in the past. But I got to listen to both presentations. So do you kind of want to give a high-level overview of the ALFA masterclass, some of the things that you talked about there?
Yeah, if I can remember that far back, I think I've tried to forget that experience. Yeah, so the ALFA masterclass, I guess maybe the title was a little bit misleading. It talked about how to master alpha in 10 easy steps. And well, we didn't talk about 10 steps, but we did talk a little bit about the baselining of authorization to understand, well, what is alpha trying to accomplish in the first place? So we had to try to strike a balance between baselining people about the different types of authorization, role-based, access control list, attribute-based, and the history of authorization. Also compared and contrasted that to authentication. So they can kind of see that we're kind of on similar tracks, but authentication was kind of moving along at a much faster pace. And of course, they also tried to make fun of them once in a while by saying, you only authenticate once in your interaction with an application, but they did it again. But authorization is happening, hundreds or thousands of times within that session. And it's a much more complex problem to solve. Where sometimes we feel like people authenticate and then like, hey, our job's done. Now authorization is someone else's problem. So, a little bit try to make fun of them, but try to get them to think like, oh, wow, authorization. I'm not saying it's more important than authentication. Definitely not. But there's a lot more to it.
Yeah. The evolutionary path that you did between authentication and authorization was one of the things that I found particularly interesting because in the regular person's everyday life, it's really true. Until you're in the space, you don't really think about it that way. And then you're like, well, why wasn't I always thinking about this? It makes so much sense. And now, kind of a side note, but in one of the presentations slides, there was spaghetti and lasagna, and you said, quote, "For some reason, my manager thinks that you can switch out a layer of lasagna." Firstly, I agree with you, Mark. You cannot switch it out. And now that we have your manager, David, on the call, David, what were you thinking?
Well, maybe before we let him babble, we should explain what that slide was about. We're talking about, like in the olden days, you had a monolith application, and that application provided all its own services. Right? It did its own authentication, did its own authorization. Heck, it maybe even housed its own data. So in the modern world, you decouple. Right? You have an authentication service. You have data decoupled off to a database, and you can have authorization decoupled from your application as an authorization service. So it makes it easier to swap out those technology stacks within your environment. So I guess would that be a metaphor or an analogy? I'll let someone smarter than me figure that out. But David said, well, technical process is kind of like lasagna. So you have different layers. You can separate them out as opposed to spaghetti where you have this big pile of things and it's hard to know what's what.
So, all right, I'll say the latter was an analogy. The former would have been a metaphor. Joke aside, I like how this turned into a cooking show. Maybe I should invite my wife to take part in the podcast as well. I want to go back to what you said, Mark. You said, never mind the lasagna. You said that going to authenticate for an authorization company was like going to a vegan show for a Weber or a grill company. And so I don't fully agree, first of all, because you choose to be vegan. You don't choose to just do authentication. Authentication is the first step in a journey of identity and cybersecurity. But besides that, since you brought up meat and barbecuing and all that, I really want to ask what kind of rub you used on your access control. Is it Rubac maybe, or no? No, too far, too straight.
Yeah.
Anyway. But yeah, the lasagna and spaghetti example, I mean, there is one expression that we hear time and time again, right, Mark and Emme, which is that when you need to do access control logic in your code, you're going to do spaghetti code, right? You're kind of interweaving your business logic code with the access control code, and it ends up kind of messy, which is also what happens if you give kids spaghetti for dinner, whereas lasagna is so much cleaner. Anyway, I do want to ask Mark, sorry, Emme, on the panel, what was your key takeaway? I know we had, I think, 5 panelists and a moderator. Am I doing the math right? All very well versed in the world of authorization with very different backgrounds in terms of technology. What was your main takeaway from the panel?
I think the main takeaway of the panel was authorization is a little bit like herding cats. Where
everyone cats or herding cats? Like, did anyone suffer?
A herd, as in HER, like farming. You're going to herd your sheep.
I know.
Yes, corral them. Yes, now you made me lose my train of thought. But yeah, it was a little bit like herding cats, not just because of the people on the panel, but authorization. People tend to just kind of go their own way and wander off and really don't pay attention. Like if there are people trying to build standards around it, they just kind of like, I'm going to come over here. Like a cat looks at you when you want to pet it. It's like, I don't want you today. I'm going to do my own thing. I think we really need to work on that a little bit more. And kind of funny, wow, I didn't realize it until I said it. But in the closing presentations they had at the conference, um, apparently I missed it earlier. They had a question about what should the role of authentication be within AI? Meaning, should all the AI agents have to authenticate somewhere? What should that look like? And they must have posed that question earlier in the week. And then at the closing ceremonies, they gave some answers. Well, they had a substitute speaker there, and that substitute speaker was Pamela Dingle from Microsoft. So she put together a quick presentation on what her answer would be, and she used cat memes as the background theme to all the topics. And she talked about it. And then when she put up a slide that showed all these AI agents and how they kind of architecturally lay out, she added the word authorization to the slide because she said, I know we talked about authenticating these agents, but she said, you know what? It's more than just that. It's also about authorization. We need to think about that too. And, there's more than just an authentication problem to solve here. And then she said, and if you saw that panel earlier, I really don't think those people are going to be able to solve this problem. So our panel did carry over a little bit, but I think it does, again, all jokes aside, shows that this is a problem and we need to get more focus on it and not be like a herd of cats and try to figure this out going forward. And that maybe AI, I know some of us are sick of AI, but it's here. But this might be the driver that finally gets something going.
So AI, Mark, the role of authentication in AI, I think is probably going to be, in a way, I was going to say more important. It's going to shift more than authorization. And what I mean by that is the existing authorization architecture, as we put it, with the PEP and the PDP, and the architecture that comes from NIST, ABAC, and Zero Trust, that is not going to change because of AI. It's going to become even more important and even more relevant and even more applicable. What will change, though, I think, is the identity, because historically we've dealt largely with human identities, trying to get access to a service or an API. Tomorrow with AI, we're going to be dealing with more non-human identities. And of course, it's not just specific to AI, right? Workload has the same issues and it's not AI related. So we're going to have maybe 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times as many non-human identities as we do human identities. And the good news is that for authorization, it does not matter. We'll see delegation use cases, we'll see consent use cases a bit more than we did before, but the architecture was already designed to cater to those use cases. So I'm not worried. If anything, I'm excited. It's creating new opportunity.
Well,
Authorization.
There was a detail that I left out. So when she started talking a little bit about authorization, it was in the context of how things are done today in terms of like OAuth and more token-based technologies. And my take from that was that when people start working on that, they're just going to try to take something like that and try to expand it, try to extend it, try to extend those models and not lean into what you just said about the PEP and PDP models. And those models that those OAuth based models have troubles with delegation and fine grained authorization and data filters and all that stuff.
Correct.
Which is what AI agents need.
Yeah, absolutely. And there has been quite a bit of work done by the folks who created MCP, but also by the folks from the OAuth working group at IETF on authorization for MCP. So if you Google these terms, you'll find a paper by Aaron Parecki that talks about patterns OAuth patterns to effectively secure MCP and agent interactions.
So, Mark, is there anything else that you want to highlight from the conference that stood out to you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, it was very passkey heavy. All these sessions were about passkeys and rolling out passkeys. So you could see that the evolution of that has gone very well. Those things are being adopted, becoming more mainstream. So I think that was fun to get a look into that side. I kind of looked at it more as a consumer, as someone who needed to use these things to understand why they work for me sometimes, and some places they don't work quite the way I think they should. Um, and I guess maybe to close it all up, at the end of the session, I went to go get some barbecue dinner, some meats, and it turned out this place didn't even smoke their meat. So I was very disappointed. So maybe we should have had a discussion about how to cook and prepare meats properly, so that restaurant would have known what to do.
Well, when we're in Gartner in Texas, for our listeners, if you're going to the Gartner IAM conference in Texas, we can hopefully fix that and maybe try to find some barbecue food there, on top of talking about all the stuff at the conference, of course.
I 100% agree, and we are definitely going to get us some Texas barbecue in December.
David, do you have anything to add? Because I know you were initially going to the Authenticate conference until your plans got changed. So is there anything you want to add on that you were going to say there?
No, no, but yes, I will add. I think, a key takeaway for us was that we want to raise the awareness of policy-based access control and generally speaking, standards and authorization, so including OpenID Auth-Zen. I'm glad that Mark went and gave the masterclass on ALFA, the abbreviated language for authorization. I watched the replay of the panel, and I think Ian Glazer mentioned the different standards that exist for policy authoring, which are ALFA, of course, ZACWL historically, OPA, RIGO, I'm forgetting one, Cedar, and there's a few more, right? And I think Ian points out that eventually we need to move to something along the lines of policy orchestration, meaning it doesn't really matter what language you use as long as you can manage all these policies consistently and test them and govern them consistently in a single pane of glass and a control plane. I think that's an interesting takeaway. And if we want people to gradually graduate from just doing authentication to now doing proper authorization, proper access control, they need to know those architectures and those standards exist. So thanks, Mark, for waving the banner at Authenticate.
My pleasure.
Okay. And now, David, instead of being at Authenticate, what conference were you at this past week?
I actually went to two different conferences. One was Identity Day in Stockholm a couple of weeks ago, where really the key word over there was identity fabric. It's an expression that Gartner and Coopinger-Cole have been using quite a bit. Martin Coopinger has an amazing slide where he summarizes what identity fabric is, and essentially it's saying that identity products can't work in silos anymore. You have to have your authentication, your user management, your governance, your fine-grained access, your PAM working together in conjunction. So Identity Day really reflected that thought process. And then more importantly, I had the pleasure of attending Platform Summit organized by Curity and Nordic APIs. So a big shout out to Renee who invited me. Thanks so much for having me in Axiomatics. I was involved in two activities, just like Mark. One was a panel on AI and the impact on API and API security and AI security. And the other was a quick talk on what my toddler has been teaching me about OAuth and authorization. Because that little guy knows, a huge amount of things about OAuth. You'd be surprised. And the panel was interesting because on the panel we had a hacker who does this as a profession, an ethical hacker, who was explaining that, of course, AI is bringing about new threats, but we also agreed that the same principles to secure AI. That we use to secure APIs can also work with AI. They're not sufficient. There's things that did not exist with APIs like prompt injection, manipulation, hallucination that you have to worry about. But generally speaking, the same patterns and the same attitude apply. And certainly for access control, like I said earlier when Mark was talking about Authenticate, the PEP PDP pattern applies just like it does for APIs, it does for AI, especially in the context of MCP. So that was the panel. It was really interesting. It is recorded. It will be on Nordic API's YouTube channel in the next few weeks or so. So do check it out. The presentation was interesting because it tries to show people that OAuth is not enough. People tend to use it as a hammer to nail every little bit of thing that sort of protrudes from a surface, whether it's a nail or not a nail. So people abuse OAuth to make it do things it shouldn't do. And in my series of talks, actually, I was talk number 3 in the series. Talk number 1 was about mistakes that people do with OAuth. And one of those mistakes was actually abusing OAuth and putting way too many claims inside of a token to address fine-grained access, when in fact, that should be delegated to a proper externalized policy decision point. Again, I don't know if I mentioned this, PEP PDP architecture. So I try to show people through a children's book. This is where my toddler ties in, that when you use OAuth, essentially, if you have the token, then you pretty much have the keys to the castle, and you can do everything you want to do. The book that I'm talking about is a book called Goodnight Gorilla, where Gorilla steals the zoo keys. So the zoo has cages, the cages have keys, the gorilla steals the keys from the zookeeper. And what's funny is that you'd think that, the illustrator would have done like one key, right? But no, there's as many keys as cages, and they're color coded. So the yellow key opens the yellow cage, and the pink key opens the pink cage, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is, the gorilla, not having authenticated, they just stole the key from the zookeeper, or the keys from the zookeeper. They could actually go and open the cages, regardless of whatever policy there may be in place, such as do not open the cage after 9 p.m., right? So this shows that if you abuse OAuth, you end up in these scenarios where you have way too much access to data. So that was my talk. But the takeaways, though, you're right, Emme, I talk too much. The takeaway, though, Emme and Mark, is that API are more important than ever before. AI is increasing the need for APIs. There's a year ago, there might have been a lot of speculation about what technology and AI was going to pick up. MCP was nascent a year ago. Now it's here, and it's here to stay. Agentic AI was also nascent a year ago, and now it's more prevalent and more well-defined. There was an interesting talk by the head of IAM at an insurance company here in the Nordics, who said that APIs and everything that supports APIs need to be treated as products. They're not a technology. They are something you can monetize and sell to your customers, your partners, your internal stakeholders. And that's an interesting point of view, because you're not just doing APIs for the sake of technology, you're actually doing APIs to create a proper product and a service.
Any closing comments from either of you before we quickly wrap up?
Yes, I'd like to say it's rather unfair that Mark gets the barbecue out in California and I'm stuck with meatballs here in Stockholm. But it is what it is.
Don't trust me. Where I went, you did not miss anything special. I won't call them out on this call here, but yeah, I think there's better places like Texas. So yeah, I look forward to joining this whatever this is, podcast thingy again after our Texas show, and we can talk about how we eat really good barbecue.
So I think, Mark and Emme, this might actually be a call to arms to actually find a good BBQ joint down in Dallas, and then maybe our auditors can recommend a place, and then the three of us go there with a microphone and we record a live podcast chewing on wings or whatever it may be they do in Texas. It's going to be a very ASMR type of podcast.
And more ribs and brisket in Texas is my first thought. Okay. Well, if our listeners have any recommendations for good barbecue places in the Dallas area, we are open to suggestions. Thank you to David and Mark for joining us on the podcast today. All of the links to their sessions that they did at conferences will be in the description once they're available. I'll also link a blog post that Mark and David worked on the PEP PDP architecture. And thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Dynamically Speaking. Stay tuned for our next one, and in the meantime, check the show notes and connect with us on LinkedIn and YouTube. And visit us at axiomatics.com to learn more about our authorization solution.